Hello and welcome to another one of these longer explorations of commonly confused words. Today I'm going to be looking at two quite high-level abstract nouns that a student of mine asked me about recently because a student of hers had asked her about it. We're going to be looking at the words freedom and liberty. Now, as with a lot of quite near synonyms, part of the problem is that the meaning of the two words is very similar and doesn't really tell you very much about the way the words are actually used. If you look up the word freedom, for example, it will tell you something like this: the condition or right of being able to do, say, think, etc., whatever you want without being limited or controlled. You look up the word liberty and it will tell you something like the freedom, you see already how we're going round in circles, the freedom to live as you wish or go where you want. Okay, so maybe freedom is something more to do with doing and saying and thinking, and liberty is more to do with living. Let's see. I think with all of these kind of words, the really important thing is to find out how they're actually used, what we do with the words, which words go together, which words collocate. And freedom is much more common than liberty. Freedom collocates much more widely. There are many more different words which work together with the word freedom. So we often talk about a free press, the importance of a free press, where newspapers and TV companies can write and talk about whatever they want to without being controlled or restricted by the government. And maybe if a particular kind of authoritarian politician comes to power, mentioning no names, you start to see press freedom being eroded or press freedom under attack. If you live in a healthy, pluralistic society where lots of different kinds of people live alongside each other, usually this kind of society tries to ensure that all groups enjoy religious freedom. People are free to practice whatever religion they follow in whatever way they choose to. Maybe also if you live in a fairly healthy, functioning society, everyone has the right to freedom of expression. People are free to express themselves through whatever means they wish and to say whatever they wish. I guess whoever you are, wherever you are in the world, you probably all want freedom of choice. We want to be free to make big decisions about our lives without being pressurized into making particular kinds of decisions. We also talk about freedom of movement, freedom of thought, freedom of worship, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly. So, here in the UK, Brexit put paid to freedom of movement within the European Union. Before Brexit, we used to be able to go and live and work anywhere in the European Union. We had freedom of movement. That was taken away from us by the Brexit vote. Freedom of thought basically means making sure that people are free to think what they want to think. Obviously within limits, because if what you're thinking about is ways of causing harm to your fellow citizens, then there comes a problem. Freedom of worship is very similar to religious freedom, basically meaning that people are free to worship their own God in whatever way they see fit. Freedom of speech, again, means that you're free to say what you think. Although, again, in any healthy society, there should be a discussion about the limits of free speech. There's the old saying that, freedom of speech doesn't mean you're free to run into a crowded cinema and scream fire, thus causing a stampede for the door, when there isn't a fire at all. And freedom of assembly means being free to gather with other people in public. Generally, these kinds of freedoms might be guaranteed by the Constitution. They're something that the state promises you. They're something that the state guarantees you. They're kind of freedoms granted to you by the state. We also kind of talk about freedom on a more individual level. So maybe, if you're the branch manager of a bank or a company or a post office or something, maybe, if you're lucky, you have considerable freedom in terms of how you run your particular branch. In a good school, teachers can usually exercise a degree of freedom in terms of choosing the material, or when it comes to choosing classroom material. Maybe schools, local councils, the government encourages, or of course sometimes suppresses, artistic freedom and the freedom of artists to express themselves. If you lose your job or get divorced, you might, initially at least, relish your newfound freedom. You might really enjoy the new freedoms that you've got in your life. As I'm sure you've seen in the news, Ukraine is still fighting for survival and fighting for freedom, fighting to be free of Russian aggression, Russian control, Russian interference. And we also talk about freedom fighters. There's the old saying that one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. And generally, freedom fighters are fighting against dictatorships, against occupation, against tyrants. We also sometimes use freedom to talk about no longer being imprisoned, incarcerated. So maybe if someone's been wrongly imprisoned, they might finally win their freedom back after 6, 7, 15 years in prison. And obviously, slaves won or gained freedom after a hard-won struggle for an end to slavery. The word liberty is much less frequently used, and again, there are often collocations that we use with liberty. So you talk about personal liberty and civil liberty. Your right to live and move as you wish. And you often hear these talked about when they're being attacked by governments. So you might hear that personal liberties are under attack, or civil liberties are being eroded. Or maybe people might complain that the government's new legislation threatens individual liberty. If you go to prison, you lose your liberty, or you are deprived of your liberty. And maybe when people are released from prison, they are given their liberty or given their liberty back. And there's also a particular chunk where if you have information that you don't feel able to give somebody because maybe, it's private information that your boss has told you not to tell anybody, it's secret information, maybe it's information that, is in the national interest to protect. You might refuse to talk about it by saying, I'm afraid I'm not at liberty to divulge that information. In other words, I'm not free to talk about that information. There are restrictions on what I'm able to tell you. Just to make life even more complicated for you though, sometimes you see liberty and freedom basically used interchangeably. So, you hear people talking about religious freedom, but also religious liberty or religious liberties. Not much difference, except religious freedom or freedom of worship is more common. It's the more common of the two collocations. So, if you're not sure or if you're in doubt, go for freedom. Always good advice. And you might sometimes see that, people are promising to protect liberty and freedom together. Just kind of emphasising how much they're going to do to make sure individuals are not bothered by the government. They're allowed to thrive and be free. And they emphasise this by using both of the nouns together with no real difference of meaning. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please do leave any comments, any questions, any examples in the section below. And if you have commonly confused words that you'd like me to make a video about, do let me know. Cheers for now.